The 2019 Hall Waters Prize for Excellence in Southern Writing was presented to songwriters Dan Penn and Spooner Oldham at a panel discussion held in the Long Hall Band Room, led by Chair of the Troy English Department, Dr. Kirk Curnutt.
We're very pleased this year to be able to award our annual Hall Waters Prize for Excellence in Southern Writing to Mr. Dan Penn and Mr. Spooner Oldham. Before I jump in, I just want to acknowledge one very important person in the audience, and that's Mr. Greg Swem. Greg, if you want to stand up just for a second. Greg and his partner, the late Dr. Wade Hall, established this award about 15 years ago, and so it's always been a lot of fun to be able to give it. I have to say that I think the English department needs to do a little more rhythm and blues, because this is the best turnout we've ever had. Well, guys, I'm just going to toss out some questions about your careers and about your catalog, but I think everybody in the room probably knows Dan and Spooner's story, but just to give you an idea, on my far left here, Mr. Dan Penn was once described by his former producing partner as the man that Rod Stewart wished he could be. And by that he means
trade with him.
that means he had a voice that could do country, pop, and soul all at once, and just a great songwriting talent as well. We'll talk about some of the hits, but the man in the middle here, Mr. Spooner Oldham, is a keyboardist extraordinaire, and when living legends like Bob Dylan or Neil Young or the Drive-By Truckers need a keyboard player, they call Spooner. And you may know him, if not by name, by sound. That's his organ at the beginning of When a Man Loves a Woman. So we'll talk about some of those contributions to those songs. So I just wanted to begin very broadly with each of you, because you were sort of there experiencing. You were the generation that sort of experienced the growth of rhythm and blues and the birth of rock and roll out of that. So what was your first musical experience? I know both of you came from musical families.
Well, mine was mostly my family was, my daddy led singings in the church and my mother played the piano. So I had early, and I was a little screaming boy on the front row, screaming just as loud as I could. I didn't know the words, so I'm trying to stay with them, you know. So I got an early start, and I started listening to WLAC radio very young. I was just barely a teenager, maybe a little before. I would hear the rhythm and blues being played on WLAC, Hossman Allen and John R. and Herman Gazard and all these guys that were the jocks on that station. And so I got a big dose of R&B and black spiritual music really early, even before Elvis. And then of course I heard Elvis and it was all over. That's the way I can put it. But I got to Muscle Shoals sometime around 1958. I went up and put some songs down, and a guy out of Nashville, a song plugger or a song finder, came to Florence, and I had a song in there called "Is a Bluebird Blue," and he picked that up and gave it to Conway Twitty, and all of a sudden I had me a hit. And I'm just still in high school in Vernon, Alabama. So had the big head, you know.
We're gonna come back to Conway Twitty in just a sec, because I wanted to ask you about that. But Spooner, I think your dad was in a band. Is that correct?
That's true, Kirk. My dad, they called him Dot, and my name was Dewey Lyndon Oldham Jr., and in my house where Mom and Dad were, they called him Dot, and they called me Lyndon. And I'm 75 now, but I think a couple years ago I asked why do they call Dad Dot, because I didn't know, you know. And they said, well, when he was born, he was so little, like a speck or a dot. But he was I remember listening to, they had a band, you know. I thought everybody had a band in their house growing up, but I realized later that was an unusual thing, you know. They'd play out in the yards, under the tree in the summertime, shade tree, and in the living room at my grandparents' house. But they had a mandolin, guitar, fiddle, steel guitar. I think he had another guitar. Dad said they played a Martin-size, auditorium-sized guitar and a Gibson mandolin. Well, anyway, they sang these three-part harmonies, the three brothers, and they were really good. And so I got to listen to them as a toddler, and I got inspired pretty quick by listening to music, you know. And I asked Dad later, I said, did y'all ever have a recording? He said, well, we paid $5 one time, went in a radio station and made one song. You know, you could just do it live, direct to disc, we call it these days. But I found it at Mom's the other day, and it's pretty scratchy, but I understand the audiologists can clean them up somewhat. But I said, well, he said, we were offered a record contract, RCA. I said, well, why didn't you take it? He said, well, there were 7 of us in the band. They only wanted to give 3%, and I said no.
So basically nothing's changed since then. It's still 3%, I'm pretty sure.
And the other thing he told me about, he said that they had auditioned for the Grand Ole Opry and passed, but back in those days, that was a pretty big deal to be accepted on that stage. Then the War II came along and broke up the party, so to speak, you know. But I got introduced to music right at home, I think, and the love for it.
Did you ever take formal lessons?
I took, me and my friend David Briggs in Chilton, Alabama, I took first, second, and third grade piano, which is, you know, very elemental, basic stuff. And it helped me in the sense that I knew when to cross my fingers over. I learned that. First, second, third, we paid $10 for 1 hour lesson a week. And that was my formal training. And I made a terrible mistake. I went a year and a half to Florence State Teachers College, and I'm in day one, I'm looking at the list of things to do, you know, like doctors, lawyers, and such, and nothing really fit my brain. I think, saw music, okay, be a music major. Terrible mistake. Because, yeah, as you know, some people are fit for that, some people aren't made for that. I wasn't made for that because week one, I'm trying to learn the scales on the clarinet, scales on the trumpet, trying to learn percussion, drums, singing in the choir, and I had never done any of that stuff, so it was just too much for me. I wasn't prepared, so I didn't last long, you know.
Kind of sounds like my piano. Mother sent me over to this lady to have piano lessons, and she kept trying to teach me the scales and stuff. And finally, I said, "When are you going to learn me? When are you going to teach me how to play something?" So I want to play a song, but she wouldn't do that, so I just kind of eased on off back to my guitar.
How old were you when you started playing guitar?
I was somewhere around 15, 16. Daddy taught me the open chords. I seen I couldn't make the football team, so I said, well, I better learn how to play guitar. Maybe I'll get a girlfriend or something. So I was pretty young, and so it wasn't long after I'd learned to play the guitar, a little bit open chords that I wrote as a Bluebird Blue. So I got started real early.
Let's talk about that song, because I think you were 18 when Conway Twitty had a hit of that, maybe 17 even. How did
I was a junior in high school.
junior in high school, and you're on the charts?
I'm on the charts. Well, you know, the Tom Stafford, the guy that ran the studio, excuse me, he called me and said, well, I went up and I put about 5 songs down in this little studio Spooner's talking about. And so Tom called me and he said, Dan, do you know you got a song going up the charts? And I said, what's the chart? And I mean, I was pretty green. And he said, well, that's where they show you, you know, what you're doing. And so I said, well, good. And he said, well, why I'm calling you is do you need any money? He said, when you got a song going up the charts and it's got a bullet next week, they'll give you a little front money. And I said, well, yeah, I need money. He said, how much? I said, $700. And I had just previously tried to buy a 54 Chevrolet from my Uncle Reuben Nichols. He fixed up this 54 Chevy, real nice, had a V8 in it and everything, real nice. And when I tried to buy it, he said, it's not for sale. And I said, well, okay. And I said, but before I leave, if you're going to sell it, what would you want for it? And he said, and that's back when money was money. And he said, he said, oh, I don't know. He said, I'd have to have something like $700. He knew I didn't have anything, you know. I was just a kid. And so I just said, okay, I remember that. So next thing I got that call, I said $700. Next thing I know, I had $700 in the mail. And I go down to my Uncle Reuben and I said, well, he said, what are you doing today? And I said, well, I'll come after the car. And he said, what car? I said, this one we're standing by, this 54 Chevy. He looked at me and said, I told you it wasn't for sale. I pulled out my money. I said, I thought you said you'd take $700 for it. And I've counted them out. I said, $700. He looked at me and he looked at that money. Then he looked at that car. And he just kept going around in circles. And finally, he just reached down and grabbed that money. He said, I'm a man of my word. So I got my car. And that's the only thing I got for a long time out of that song.
Dan, I read a quote from you once that it's interesting that you just mentioned Elvis, because I read a quote from you once that said you really didn't like rock and roll that much, that you loved rhythm and blues, but rock and roll went a different direction. Can you explain that a little bit? What did rhythm and blues mean to you?
Well, you know, rock and roll was basically pretty jerky. You know, it was a little frantic, and me being a calm person, you know. But no, I just heard so much R&B there on the radio late at night. I had my own little bedroom. I had 2 sisters; they had their own rooms, and we're out in the country. And I got my little green radio. I got a little green radio, and when the family would turn in, I would too, but I'd turn my little radio on. I'd listen to WLAC till whenever, you know, late. And so I was just into that. And I just saw a lot more depth in that than rock and roll. I mean, rock and roll is off the top of your head kind of, you know, but R&B is kind of down in here. So I like that a lot better. And I got nothing against rock and roll. I mean, I made a couple of dollars off some rock and roll songs. So not knocking it too hard.
I read another interview you spoke when you both started playing in bands as teenagers. And I want to talk a little bit about the circuit back then that you all played on. But Dan, you were the front man, I think, of the, was it the Mark V? Was that what it was, the name of the band?
It was a Mark V in the beginning. That was Kerrigan, Briggs, Putnam, and me as a stand-up singer. And then they had horns and an electric guitar, Marlon Green on that. And so we wasn't making any money. So we cut it down to, we got us a hearse and became Dan Penn and the Pallbearers.
And I think they carried you on stage in a coffin, or is that fake story?
Down in Mississippi State, they just, you know how the kids are, they just love death. until they die. But up here they love death, you know. So yeah, I never was taken in, but I was asked in Starkville one night. They said, Dan, they said, do you mind coming in and would you let them bring you in a casket? I said, for extra money. They said, we'll pay whatever it takes. So I got home back to Florence, and I got to thinking about that, and I said, I ain't getting in no casket. So we got back to our gig at the next Mississippi State gig, and I walked in, they said, Dan, where's your casket? I said, way in the future, I hope. So I wouldn't do it. Not even for money, you know, that didn't seem right. That's too close.
Spooner, do you remember the first time you played live with a band?
Good question. Oh, let's see. Yeah, one of the earlier moments, okay, I was walking myself through this 8th grade. I'm walking down the hallway at Chilton Junior High School, and my friend at the time, Ron English, he had this good speaking voice, and I always envisioned, he loved sports, and I'm thinking he'll grow up one day to be on the radio sportscaster, probably where he'll go, and I'm already figuring out, I'm daydreaming about what he's going to be. And the next thing that happened, I look on the left, walking down the hall, there was an empty schoolroom with an upright piano against the wall. And I said to Ronald, you ever sing anything, Ronald? He said, well, I can sing a little. He said, and at that time, that was in the 50s, one of the records on the radio, popular, was Jerry Lee Lewis, Whole Lot of Shaking Going On. I said, and I had played a little mandolin and a little guitar, but I never played piano, so I went in there, and we did, you know, the best we could on the rendition of he and I, just a whole lot of shaking going on. We did pretty good, so we decided to practice every week and learn these cover songs, and so we had Roger Hawkins on drums. I think he was 15 years old, and Bruce Oldham, my cousin, had a nice Fender Stratocaster guitar, and I think when we practiced, we get to learn these songs at Bruce's house, and one day one of us said, well, we probably need a bass player to make a band out of this, and so we called Junior Lowe, and I wish I had a photograph of that moment, because that house goes up a hill and it's gravel and the dust flying, and he's coming to practice with us day one, and he had that big old bull bass strapped on top of the car, dust is flying. So, you know, and I think we did a couple of talent shows and dances and proms and stuff, but around locally. But that was the first experience of being a band that you gotta, you know, we weren't writing that many songs. Nobody was really enough to do a set, so you had to learn other people's songs and learn how to play them. So,
Great. So you guys are both in late 50s there in Florence.
No,
and
I'm in Vernon.
You're in Vernon.
I didn't meet Spooner until around 60.
Okay. But you were going to the studio above the pharmacy there in Florence, weren't
I
you?
was going there. I did go there like 58, 57, 58, put my songs down, and then I was away from there a long time.
Okay.
And then when I went back, I met Spooner and some of these other guys, Briggs and some of them that I got in the band with.
Tell us a little bit. I mean, one of the things that sort of fascinates me is back then the music could be regional. I mean, songs could break out of different regions. And what do you think it was about that northwest corner of Alabama that just bred so many fantastic musicians?
Well, there wasn't a lot of hits broke out of there. I mean, I remember Charlie Sands. He had a hit, and Bobby Denton had a hit, and but what came out of that area? I think you're talking about the great musicians that came out of there. Yeah, there were so many great musicians, and and great studio musicians. I mean, there was Briggs and Putnam and Kerrigan. They were Rick Hall's first band, and then they left, and me and Spooner was writing for him, and they left him, and then here come Roger Hawkins and David Hood and all the later model guys, and Spooner played with them. But I don't know that whole section of Alabama just seems like they have the greatest musicians pop up out of there. Rick always had faith in it. He was never without a great musician. They always came there, maybe from Florida or somewhere, but he knew where Muscle Shoals was.
But some of the records that came out of the shows, the early record, like You Better Move On, for instance, what I learned about this country and music spreading was like, okay, like you said, they used to have in Billboard magazine a regional breakout section. And I don't think they do that anymore, but sometimes a record will be in New Orleans or Memphis, and I always love to see those records. I always like that kind of music a lot.
Always break out in Cleveland, you know.
But the first hit record I played on overdub organ, which was a new turn to me at that time on tape, it was You Better Move On. I played organ, David Briggs played piano, and but in the Billboard, it said regional breakout, Baltimore, Maryland. And I thought, well, how does that work? We're in Alabama making this music, and it's breaking out somewhere else, you know.
I'm actually very curious how that does work. I mean, you went into those studios. I think it was Spartus above the pharmacy, and then the early. I think there was a Fame before there was the famous one. And you'd go there, what kind of technology was it? And once you cut a track, most of it's cut live, I think, back in those days. You mentioned you overdubbed. That was fairly rare back then, I think. But then what happens after that? They press a 45 and then...
Well, you're recording on mono tape, so it's one track. So everybody goes down on one track. And then sometimes they had two machines, and you could go across. If you wanted to overdub some horns or something, you could go across and put them on as you went. So that was the norm for recording in the South, all the way from Memphis to Nashville, everywhere. That was the way it was in the late 50s. And what was that other question?
About the 45s. We just had the 70th anniversary of the 45 a month ago.
Yeah, well, they would you take them to the mastering room, and they would master the record. What that meant was that was your last chance to add some highs or bottom or middle or get it to sound even better than it was in the studio. And sometimes, you know, they'd put too much bass, and that stylus would just explode. So too much bass wasn't what you did. And I remember Rick recorded, what's his name, Steal Away? Jimmy Hughes. And I went with him to Nashville. We had to go to Nashville to master the record. And he got 3 or 4 masters, some of them bass heavy, some of them highs, middle. And we went out to, we took the dubs out to WLY radio, and at midnight on Sunday night they played all 4 of them. So we could sit in the car and listen to the masters, and so we both picked the same one, and that's the one they put out. So it was all about how it sounded in the car. You know, it didn't matter. Nobody had a whole lot of record players. They just wanted to get in the car and ride and listen to all that R&B, you know. So it was a great medium. It sounded really good. I mean, stereo's probably better, but I still cherish those mono days. You know, everything goes together right now. You have to make a decision. But now we go in the studio, you know, we put 40 tracks and you come back and fix it later, you know. Well, that was a fix it then, and I like that.
Exactly, Dan. You know, I learned a lot by being a player in a studio that had mono equipment, because what that meant to me is a great training ground as a picker, because what that meant was, okay, you got a bass player over here and you got a guitar player here and I'm playing piano and organ, and you got a singer. When you're recording tape mono, that means you all got to play together at the same time, and if one of the players mess up, make a mistake, everybody's got to do it over. So you try not to, be too loose with. So that part was good. Just learning to play together, it was a good experience.
So Dan, when you went to fame there in the late 50s, early 60s, and you were Rick Hall's first on-staff, on-salary songwriter. Can you tell us how much a week you were making? And
I was getting rich back then, $25 a week. But my daddy was only making 40 over at the garment plant there in Vernon. And I told him, I went to the garden one day, he was working in his garden. I said, Daddy, I think I'm going to move to Florence. He said, what are you going to do up there? I said, I'm going to write songs. He said, I don't know anything about songwriting, but tell me something. How much are you making? I said, 25 a week. He said, well, son, I'm making 40 over here at the garment plant, and I can get you on making the same thing I make. I said, you might ought to hold that job for me, Dad. I don't know. I might be back. But yeah, I was Rick Hall's first writer. I'd gone to Texas to live a little while with my aunt out there. They were trying to straighten me out. I was a little wild. So she got me straightened out, and I came on back to Alabama, and I started asking them around about Rick. I knew he had a studio, so I said, where's Rick? So his father-in-law finally told me, said, he's down at his new studio. And I went down there, and he was walking around on the cement pads. And I said, what are you doing, Rick? He said, I'm building my studio. I'm figuring. Oh, okay. He said, come to work for me. And I said, doing what? He said, writing songs. And so he told me he'd pay me $25 a week. So I said, well, okay, I'll do that. And that's the way I got started with him. And he gave me a key to the studio, and I was always in and out of there when me and Spooner wrote. They would all leave the building about 6 or 7 o'clock at night, him and his wife and some pickers and stuff. And me and Spooner, we had the studio. We had the studio all night long. And we had great big 87 speakers. We had great microphones, good pianos, organs and stuff. So we had to run the place, and we had every opportunity to write good songs. And that's one of the things that helped us so much, because we had just acres of equipment, Norman mics, for demos, just screaming one of them, And so being at fame was the key. I mean, yeah, I had a little Bluebird song, and it got me started, but it went for a long time between Bluebird and I'm Your Puppet. It was about 5 years there that I was about ready to take Daddy's job. But I would think about that sometime every Friday afternoon. I think I could have $40. But then I started playing on the weekend with David and them, and so then I was making more than Daddy, so counting the writing. But Fame Studio was a big door for me and Spooner.
If you're on salary for $25 a week, how many songs a week are you having to produce for him? Or was there a limit? Or
no numbers.
Okay.
It was just $25 a week. Here's the key to the studio. Write me some songs. Because he was a producer, he wanted to cut more hit records. And he wanted somebody working on songs for him. And so there was no number, like 12 songs a year or nothing. And I'm glad, because we'd have never got ahead if we had to do that. We just went in there full writing. It was like write. We'd write one song, we'd put it down. We'd just drink another cup of coffee and write another one. Most people, well, in the very beginning they didn't, but most people ended up writing, 12 songs a year. I had to guarantee them that. I was practicing producing back then. I was thinking about putting some records together, and wanted to produce records, and in the back of my mind, but I had written, after we'd written I'm Your Puppet, and I engineered that for the James and Bobby Purify record, and we had a hit on that, so I had written a hit, I had engineered a hit, and now I needed to produce a hit. That was the way my mind worked. And Rick wasn't really asking me to do that. He had hired me as a writer, that's what he wanted. I understand that now, but back then all I wanted to do was produce me a record. I figured I could ride around it, you know. But he was pretty firm, and Percy Sledge came. He came in, and he brought two guys with him. They were pulling a B3 organ into the studio. That's a pretty big organ. And they pulled it in there, and Rick had told me, he said, Dan, I was the second engineer at this point. So he said, these guys are going to come in here, and I want you to cut a tape on them. He said, I want to hear them. I said, okay. So here's Percy Sledge and two other guys. And I turned on and recorded them, and they were playing that descending chord. Oh, I love you, baby. And it's coming on down. Later became, when a man loves a woman. You know, Marlon Green finished it out right. But anyway, so I put it down, and I told Percy, come back Wednesday or something, I'll let you know what Rick said. So I played it to Rick, and he said, I don't think so, Dan. I said, Rick, this guy's a hit. This Percy Sledge guy, he's a hit. He said, no, I don't hear it. I said, let me cut him. No, I don't want to do that either. So at that point, I guess in the back of my mind, I'm starting to look for the door. Because I'm going to cut me a hit. I don't care what I got to do. That's just the way it was. And I was just forward and braggadocious, and, you know, I was going to cut me a hit. I didn't know what kind of record it'd be, but I was going to cut a hit. So I got to Memphis, and I went to Memphis and moved up there to work with Chip Moman at American Studio. And that's when I left Alabama. And I got up there, and I got a hold of a little group called the Box Tops. And Alex Chilton and the Box Tops, and our first little record, The Letter.
I think when they first came in, Alex Chilton was not actually their singer. And
no, he wasn't. He wasn't. There was another little redheaded guy come in with him,
and you and he didn't get along when you were trying
he was cursing, and you know, not that I was above that, but it's just he was fractious, and it made everything nervous, and made me nervous. And so I told their manager, I said, "Here's the tape, number 4 song. Find another singer. Be back here Saturday week. We'll cut this song." Okay. So when they walked in, he brought in a 16-year-old Alex Chilton, whom I'd never seen, and he knew the song. He had it down. We cut it, and it sold 4 million records. And in 1967, it was the record of the year in 1967, and so that's the way it went down.
And you're the one that put the airplane on at the end of the song.
I put the airplane on it. I stamped it on there. You know, when I got through with the record, I played it to Chips, and he said, "That's a pretty good little rock and roll record, Dan." He said, "But if you'd take that airplane off," I just reached over and got me a razor blade. I said, I just got above the tape, and I said, "I'll cut that tape off her, and we won't even have a record. How about that?" He said, "It's your record. It's your." I said, "Thank you."
Now, did you have to go to the airport at Memphis and tape that yourself, or was
No, it wasn't. There was a black fella that used to hang around the studio there, and I forget his name. I shouldn't, but I do. I forget his name. And we had a record player in the next room. And that's when they had those sound-on-sound records, you know, about everything. Just started coming out with those. And he kept dropping, I kept backing the tape up to the space, and he kept dropping the needle. And most times it missed, you know. But that one time, he dropped it, and I said, "Oh, yeah. That's all right." So got my airplane, and that's what made it. That song was really, really big for the Vietnam boys. And you know that'd be the case, you know. You want out of there. And then when that airplane came on,
They were Going home.
They were going
Yeah.
home.
We'll come back to the Bach Tops in just a second, but I wanted to jump back to Muscle Shoals just a bit because I'm very intrigued by Spooner and the Spoons. I was digging around and found a couple CDs that you had put out. Did you try to front your own band, or were you just goofing around? Or
That was my effort at, like Dan said, he wanted to produce. I didn't really envision producing, but it was sort of an effort to produce because I remember Dan and I wrote that song, "Wish You Didn't Have to Go," and I'm thinking, well, I like that, and what can I do with that? And so I guess I spent $500. I rented Fame Studio. I didn't get a discount there, $50 an hour, I remember. But I thought, well, the best thing I can do for me as an artist singing is I don't sing that much, so if I call and ask my favorite local singers like Dan Penn, Louis Robinson, and one more, Ronald English. So four of us, I think, gathered around one microphone and sang that song, and I spent my $500, and I was happy. I had a good band, and I think Rick Hall heard it the next day or two, and I rode up to Nashville with him. He had that song in his hand. He played it to somebody, and they released it. But that's about it. It was covered. I didn't sell any records, but and we didn't go on the road, or we didn't do any gigs at Spooner & Spoon. But that was a one night effort at Spooner & Spoons.
I actually love the B-side on that. Do You Want to Get Married? Is that right? That's a fun little Louie Louie type song there. It's a neat beat on that.
That's probably the time frame where I was thinking at the time, back when Louie Louie was hot on the radio charts and so forth.
We always tried to borrow something from somebody. If it was hot, it must be pretty good. So we'd get maybe one little key from them or something, and they got it from us too. So.
Well, I think that's one of the most fascinating things about songwriting is taking those elements of familiarity and giving them a new spin and putting new context in it and making it your own.
Well, it's okay. It's okay until they get one of your magical chords and riffs, and they use that, and you go, uh-oh. And you don't want to do no litigation, Well, so what we going to do? Well, it doesn't matter until the money comes in. If there's no money coming in, who cares? So that's kind of the way that works.
So let's talk about I'm Your Puppet, which originally began life as The Puppet, I think when you cut the demo.
Okay.
Your guys' version of that song is a ballad, and it's and the hit version, the recorded version, is a little more up-tempo.
Yeah.
When you heard the final version, were you sort of thrown by what they did?
I was the recording engineer. At that time I was young, and I considered they were ruining my song. Yeah, it wasn't exactly what I had in mind. They weren't saying I'm the puppet. They were saying I'm your puppet. I said that ain't right. I always liked things that said the letter. That's why I was attracted to that. And I like the things. That was short and to the point. But that song started because I had just bought a little 12-string Stella guitar, and never had a 12-string. And I started playing this little. Me and Spooner got together to write, and I brought out my little 12-string, and I'm going ting 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 ting, ting 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 ting. And Spooner just throwed some chords in behind it, boom 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 boom. And I started singing, pull a string and I'll wink at you, I'm your and on, and we wrote it that way. And here these boys had, they kind of jabbed it up quite a bit, and faster, and Sam and Davey like, and I just thought they took it out of context, but after the first check came, I was a believer.
It's interesting when you talk about those songs coming so organically. You guys were in a position where you had to come up with a follow-up to the letter, and you were.
I had a red phone in my bedroom from New York, and I got a call one day after the letter had sold and sold and sold, and they said, guy said, well, Dan, we're going to need another follow-up to the letter. And I said, yes, sir, what do you got in mind? He said, well, I'd like another letter. And I said, I don't do that. I can't do that. He said, well, what do you want to do? I said, put out Neon Rainbow. That was one we had cut, another Wayne Carson song we had recorded on the album. And I said, put that out. Well, they reluctantly did. It didn't sell but $500,000, so suddenly it was a dud. Here I went from $4 million down to $500,000, and they're looking at me like, okay, what now, Buster? So I says, I called Spooner. I said, Spooner, we got to write the next hit for the box tops, and it's got to be up-tempo. Okay, he said. So we got together and we wrote Cry Like a Baby. And we won the game again. But there's always that pressure as a writer or as a producer, particularly a producer, if you've cut a hit, they want the next one. And that's where the pressure comes from. You know, it's like the first one was easy, but then they want the follow-up. My goodness, what do you mean? You think I'm just going to reach up and get it? I don't have an idea one. But we did. We got together to write the box top song. I'll give you a little story here. Anyway, so we're in the studio for 2 days and 2 nights trying to write this song. I kept tearing up pieces of paper and throwing them in the can because it just wasn't good enough. So finally, after 2 days, we kind of looked at each other and said, well, it's time to go home. Spooner said, yeah. So we go across the street to get a little food at this little cafe. It's 4 in the morning, and nobody out. So I lock the studio, and we go across. And we sat down in the booth and ordered. And so we're just sitting there, 2 big songwriters. We can't think of nothing. Nothing to please me. I'm the big old producer, you know. I'm trying to come up with a hit. I can't find it. Finally, after sitting there looking at each other, dejected for a good while, Spooner just put his head over on the table and said, I could cry like a baby. I said, what'd you say, Spooner? He said, cry like a baby? I said, that's it. That's what we're looking for. I knew it immediately. I didn't know what it looked like, but I knew I'd know it when I found it. And when he said that, I said, that's it. That's out. And the time we got, I gave the guy some money. I said, keep the food. We don't need it now. And that was the truth. We just in that second or two, in 5 minutes, we had gone from complete losers to complete winners. I mean, the time we got across the street to get the key back out and open the studio again to go back in to do a demo and to write the song, I already had, when I think about the good love you gave me, I cry like a baby. Kalunk, we ended the studio. And I said, Spooner, you run for the organ, get it going again. I'm going to turn on the machine, which I just turned off. And so he runs out there, and I hear him on the organ. Got a mic on, and I got me a mic to sing on. And we put a 1/4-inch tape, almost a full 1/4-inch tape on the machine, and we wrote it while that tape was being played. It was recording as we wrote it. I should have kept that tape.
Let's step back just a sec to the Aretha Franklin era at Fame. In early 1967, Jerry Wexler, who is head of Atlantic Records, brought her down there, and she was not the Queen of Soul yet. She was still trying to find her voice. You guys were sort of instrumental, and Fame Studios were instrumental in kind of helping her find her identity. And you in particular are given credit for I Never Loved a Man, for being able to pull that song together when it was sort of spinning out of control in the studio. Do you want to tell that story?
Well, you know, Aretha Franklin, first of all, back in the Fame studio at that time, in the hallway, entry hall lobby, there was a big chalkboard, had a month of January on it. week 1, week 2. And I would sometimes drive by. At that time, I was the only keyboard player, wasn't anybody knocking on the door to get my job. So I could just walk in there and look, see if the session booked. And that week, it had Aretha Franklin all week long. January, the first week, I think. But anyway, she shows up with her husband, Ted White, at the studio, and Jerry Wexler. Was it Tom Down, I think? Rick Hall was in the control room. All these musicians, and as I recall, it seemed like they played a little homemade demo of this songwriter and the song, and whatever we heard, I know we were all looking at each other, scratching our head. What does that mean? I can't figure that out. What they want to do with this thing, and just so. I don't know. I guess I said a little prayer. Maybe God helped me. I don't know. But I want to work. I want to make money today. I'm not going home yet, kind of thing. All this stuff's here, and we can't, get traction under the wheel.
That's exactly right. Okay.
So you might remember some of it.
Well, I do remember that I was there, and I'd already left Muscle Shoals. I lived in Memphis, but Chip's mama got called to come play guitar. He was a great guitar player. And so I was there, and I was watching everybody fly on the wall. And all the musicians were looking around like, who is this girl? And I knew exactly who she was. I'd been listening to WLAC for many years. I heard her and her father, Brother Franklin, and her singing and all kinds of stuff. So I knew who they was. And I knew something was about to happen. And she just walked over to the piano, just kind of out of the middle of everybody, walked over to the piano and sat down and hit this "Come Hear the Chord." And everybody ran for their instruments. And then there was that big deluge of complete. Nobody knew what to do. It was like they played the tape, and then they played the tape again, and Wexler kept looking around for somebody to say something. Nobody said nothing. Finally, out of the blue, Spooner, here he come. Blum, dum, 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 dum. Dum, 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 dum. You're no good, heartbreaker. It was on. Everybody, Chip said, Spooner's got it. And he did. He had it. And they cut that song, and everybody knew it was a hit. They had the horns there. They played not completely live, but they overdubbed right away. And, by the middle of the afternoon, it was a smash, and everybody knew it. So Wexler came to me, Mr. Wexler came to me and said, Dan, I'll cut that song. I'll cut that do-right song, but I don't have any words for the bridge. I said, I'll get you some words, Jerry. So I go over in the cloakroom, and I'm over there in the cloakroom, and I'm writing down. So the only thing I could come up with was my favorite song of the day was, what was it, honey? James Brown, what was the song? It's a man's world, but I wouldn't be nothing without a woman or a girl. Anyway, so I said, I bet old James wouldn't mind if I said, they say that it's a man's world. Okay, that's what I wrote down. I'm in the closet by myself. Now I'm trapped again. And so all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Mr. Wexler sticks his head in the door and says, hey, Dan, honey, baby, what you got for old Jerry? And I said, this is what I got, Jerry. So I told him, and he said, oh, I have your next part. And I said, what's that? And he said, but you can't prove that by me. Thank you, Jerry. I wrote that down. So I'm locked up again. I'm going, well, they say it's a man's world, but you can't prove that by me. About that time, Aretha stuck her head in the door and said, hey, Dan, baby, what do you got for Aretha? And I said, this is what I got, Aretha. They say it's a man's world, but you can't prove that by me. She said, I have your next part. And I said, what's that? And she said, as long as we're together, baby, show some respect for me. I wrote that down. Thank you, Aretha. So sometimes things are done unusually. And that was one of them. And you know, by that time they'd already had a big blow up at the studio. Rick had got a little bit drunk, and her husband got a little drunk, and it was a bad day. Somebody had kind of, one of the horn players had kind of pinched her or something. Next thing I know, they're all out of there, and here I stand with Spooner, and I think Tommy Cogbill was hitting the bass every once in a while. It's just a little, and I'm singing "Do Right Woman" in her key. Oh, it's pitiful. But, you know, and I just said to myself, you ain't going to make no money this week, brother. You might well just forget about it. So I thought I had completely lost out. But, you know, then they called the band, the same band, to go to New York to Atlantic Studios and finish the record. Well, I said, I'm going too. So I got on the plane, and I go to New York with them, and we all getting off the elevator, and Mr. Wexler said, Dan, you and Chips come with me. And we went to the control room of the Atlantic Studios, and they played the tape that Aretha and her sisters and all had made on over that track that we'd cut in Alabama. And, you know, I was just completely stunned. It was fantastic. It's still, today you play it, it's still fantastic. So strange and wonderful things happen in the music business.
I think part of what makes "I Never Loved a Man" and your riff there so you know, memorable too is the type of keyboard you were playing, which was a Wurlitzer piano, electric piano, and that kind of became a signature for you after that song.
Yeah, the Wurlitzer electric piano, you know, they were manufactured in Corinth, Mississippi, and they quit making them in mid-'70s. But the reason I learned to like that keyboard, I think, was the beginning. Back when me and Dan, and we were in different bands. I was in a band called Hollis Dixon and the Keynotes. He had his band, and there were different bands, Weegens and I forget, Mickey Buckins and the New Beats, all kind of bands locally there. And the band I was in, Tommy Couch, was a booking agent, so. He later became Malaco Records, one of the owners, but back then he only had a booking agent in Jackson, Mississippi, and he would book us every weekend at a college fraternity party, so around the Southeast. And then it paid well, but there was no electronic keyboards. You know, what do you do? I mean, so that was you could unscrew the legs, put it in the trunk of the car, and here you go. You know. Screw the legs on when you get there and plug it up. And I just learned, like 2 weeks ago, I asked Donnie Shrigley Jr. Donnie Shrigley used to play guitar in our band. His son's a recording engineer at Fame now. And he said, you know, my dad, Donnie Shrigley, told me how y'all did that. He had an amplifier. He would plug his guitar in an amplifier. A bass player would plug his bass in that same amp, and you'd plug your electric piano in the same amp. We'd mix it ourselves, you know. You're
talking mono now, aren't you?
But that was my introduction, so I got used to playing that instrument on the weekends as a youngster, you know. So it became sort of a second nature to.
What'd I say?
Yeah, right. That's the first time I heard that instrument, Ray Charles, What I Say, and it resonated in my brain. It's an unusual sounding instrument, you know. And
yeah, me and Linda, we were in a cafe there in Vernon, and I was going up to play the jukebox. She said, play What I Say. I said, what'd you say? She said, what'd I say? And I said, well, what did you say? She said, play What I Say by Ray Charles. Oh, I get it. That was a great record.
One of your songs that I absolutely love is Sweet Inspiration, and by the Sweet Inspirations. And I'm wondering how that song came about, and I'm not sure everybody really remembers who the Sweet Inspirations were, but...
Well, I'll give you a little bit of that one. So me and Spooner, we come, as we usually did, we nonchalantly came busting through American Studios at 2 in the afternoon, you know. And we seen these girls over here, and they're kind of singing, black girls, and we could see the folks from New York in the control room, and they were cutting this song that I, for one, didn't think much of it. It was not a very good song, but they kept going over and over and over. Finally, I told Spooner, I said, Spooner, you want to write him one? He said, yeah, why not? So you go up the stairs at American to get to the writing room, and he's ahead of me. And I said, hey, Spooner, what are we going to call it? And he said, well, they're called the Sweet Inspirations. How about that? I said, fine. So we went on up there. We wrote the song. We came back down, and we had it on a little cassette. He played guitar. Wasn't a keyboard there. He played guitar, and I just sang it. And we come down, and Tom Dowd and Aretha Martine were the two from New York. They were in the control room, and so we stood around there a minute, and they just kept cutting that same old sad song. And finally, I just pulled the tape recorder up and held my hand up. I said, hey, Tom. And he didn't look at me for a while. Finally, he kind of looked at me like, how dare you speak? And I said, I've got your hit right here. He looked at me again like, you must be crazy. And Aretha Martine, the smart guy in the room, said, play it. Played it. Next thing I know, the whole band and the girls and everybody come in the control room. They know something's happening. And there was not a question asked about whether they wasn't going to start on that song right now. And they did. They cut that song. And it was a funny thing. Spooner was playing guitar on that little demo and playing it good. And Reggie Young, who just passed and was the greatest guitar player. And, you know, Reggie listened to it for a minute, and finally he just gave the guitar to Spooner. He said, Spooner, I can't beat that. He said, you play it. So Spooner takes it off, starts playing it. So I go in the control room, and next thing I know, the guys from New York are taking a lunch break. Let's take a lunch break. Okay. But I'm left in the control room by myself. And I'm wondering, where's he got that tape parked? You know, they've been cutting this same old song. I wonder where he parked it. Did he get at the front or the back? And I decided it don't make any difference because it was so bad anyway. So they started running the song with Spooner playing the guitar now. And it sounded good automatically. Right off, the girls knew it. They just got right on it. And they, you know, within 20 minutes, they were peaking. And I said to myself, Spooner Oldham ain't no guitar player. He's going to play out pretty soon. And I said, it'll never sound no better than this. So I just reached over and hit record. I said, we're rolling. And while they were going to lunch, we cut their tape. And when they come back, I told them, I said, Mr. Tom, well, you've gone to lunch. We recorded your tape. And I said, I didn't mean to. but Spooner was playing so good, I had to do it. And so, again, he kind of looked at me pretty gruff, and Aretha said, play it. So we played it, and sure enough, that's the record they used. They put some horns and stuff on it. But like I say, sometimes things happen funny, especially when you're young, and it's your song. And it would have never sounded as good as that again. I was convinced.
Let me ask you about Memphis in 1968, because you've spoken a lot in interviews about how the assassination of Martin Luther King changed the music scene. Can you address that just a little bit?
Well, yeah, I could say a few words about it. I was in the studio. I was overdubbing, mixing, working on something. And Chip Moman called me, and he said, Dan, get out of there. He said, they shot Martin Luther King. And it didn't take me long to figure that out. So I got out and got my Cadillac, went home. And, you know, that was about all there was to it, except everything, the whole city, the whole air just changed. Of course, everybody was mad. You take a whole city mad and hurt, it changes things, because it was a great town before that happened. People got along. It was real nice. But, and it's nice again now. It's pretty nice. It's kind of coming back around. But for years now, it's been a lot of pressure in that town. So I left. Everybody left. Stax shut down. Everybody left except High Studios. They're still there. And I still like to go, but I like Memphis. You know, Memphis is a great town. They got a lot of great people in there. But at that point, there was no use in staying. It was pretty hostile.
Spooner, you actually left Memphis, and I think you moved to Los Angeles for a career as a studio sideman. How was L.A. different than Alabama? That seems like a stupid question, I know, but...
That's a twofold question to me. My wife, Karen, over here, we've been married like 49 years, but okay, we got married, moved out there, and one of the first things I did was go downtown Hollywood, Howard Johnson's Cafe, and so I'm looking at the menu and just trying to look for something familiar, you know, like back home in Alabama kind of food, and saw catfish. Oh, yeah, I like catfish. Okay. So bring me some catfish, please. And, well, the lady, she brought a plate of catfish. I think it had slaw on it, maybe. And that was it. And next time she came around, I said, ma'am, have some hush puppies, please. She says, sir, we don't sell shoes here.
So you knew you were in a different world then.
But you know, the difference as a music person, yeah, I was used to fame, being in a house band, same guys play every day, and in Memphis I was in a house band, same guys play every day, and I joined a house band in Los Angeles. But we didn't have any clients. It was so new. I mean, you know, so the work I got pretty quick was at other studios with different musicians every day. And they were all good, you know, people I'd heard of and knew about. But, so I got to play with different players all the time. And it was sort of spooky at first because that unfamiliarity. But when it works out, it's boosts you up a little bit. But yeah, that was a big difference, playing with a lot of different people.
You had an experience while you were out there that you got a call one day and you actually thought the woman on the phone was either the secretary at the record company or somebody asking you and Dan for a song for an album that was being made. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, that was, I was in Los Angeles. I was on a session with Everly Brothers. It wasn't during their hit phase. It was like their final album, I guess, but good to meet them. And Paul Rothschild was a record producer. And after we finished that day's recording, he cornered me over and said, "You and Dan Penn still writing songs?" I said, "Well, yeah." He lives in, I think it's Nashville at the time. Memphis, and I live here, so we don't see each other very often, but we still write together. So he said, "I'd love to hear what y'all write. I'm going to produce Janis Joplin's next album, and love to hear what y'all doing." And just a little light bulb went off. I remember Dan and I had written one verse of a song. We didn't get back around to finish it. And I said, "If you want to hear, you know, what we got started, I played over the piano here and played the verse of "A Woman Left Lonely" that Dan and I had written." He said, "Y'all finish that. I'm sure we'll record that with Janis." And so I called Dan. He was interested in finishing it, and I flew back to Memphis. We finished it. And then I got back home in Los Angeles, and the phone rang, and I hear you got the song for. I thought it was a secretary, but now I realize it was Janis on the phone. You got a song for somebody. I forget how she worded it, but it's like I knew what she's talking about. I said, "Yeah, I'll bring it over there. I got a tape." Yeah, she recorded it. Well, when I walked in first time in the studio, the band was playing, and she had a guitar around her neck, and she was doing Me and Bobby McGee. So Paul Rothschild, the engineer, called me up to the control room. I sat up there and watched that song being recorded, and after they finished it, Paul said, I think I'll get a session guy to play the guitar. I said, please don't. That sounds funky, but it's good. I don't know what they did. It didn't matter, but what they did with it. But and I met Janis, gave her a hug. I said, Janis, you got a great career going. Proud of you. And she looked at me like I'd hurt her, like her eyes, like I'd stabbed her or something. I thought, how? She said, you know, Spooner, I don't think it's going to last another day or two. And I'm hearing that, and I'm knowing she's going to do our song. But anyway, I went home that night thinking, what does that mean? But of course, she died pretty quick next day or two. But she did a great version of our song in the process, you know.
I love to listen to her version and then listen to the Charlie Rich version. And it's just so different. I mean, that's what's amazing about the flexibility of your guys' songs. Yeah. Well, we're out of time, and you guys have been very patient with my questions. I hope I didn't nerd out on you too much. But it's just a great opportunity to be able to learn about the music business and about creativity and inspiration. And we're just so very honored to have both of you here at Troy University today. And so thank you very much, and thanks everybody for coming out.
Thank y'all.
Simple kind